Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns 24/7, joined as always by our fearless leader, the managing editor of Horns 24/7, the one and only Taylor Estes. Taylor, it is, it's Sunday morning after Texas loses a 57-56 overtime game with previously one-win Kansas.
I I mean, I think we're both at a loss of words. For our listeners that are hearing this, first of all, we're recording at 1 a.m. So apologies, you're getting the flagship after dark right now. But it was just unbelievable, Chip. Like sitting in the press box next to you watching this go down. I mean, it was like the Twilight Zone. It was basically like 2019 all over again. The Kansas game, that Texas actually won by a last minute or last second field goal. But this was on the other end of the spectrum. I mean, just everything that could have went wrong at the worst ideal time, I feel like, for Texas in this game.
Yeah, and I've said all year this season is like a cruel riddle because we look at the Big 12 landscape. Texas should have beaten Oklahoma. They're
Mhm.
up 28-7. They're up 18 going, late third quarter. Same thing, Oklahoma State, Baylor. Tonight, they are terrible in the first half and go down by 21 twice, and then finally play a good second half. Like,
Yeah.
battled back, tied this game against all odds, a touchdown pass from Casey Thompson to Cade Brewer with 22 seconds left to tie this game, despite 4 turnovers by Texas, 10 penalties, 3 unsportsmanlike conduct personal fouls against Texas. This ridiculous quarterback rotation in which both Casey Thompson and Hudson Card got strip sacked because the left tackle, Christian Jones for Casey Thompson, Andre Carrick for Hudson Card, couldn't block their guy and give up a strip sack. And then Hudson Card comes back from his strip sack and throws a 31-yard pick six. And Casey Thompson, meanwhile, ends up tying Colt McCoy's touchdown passes in a game record with 6 and runs for a touchdown.
And was benched too, mind you.
And was benched.
Tied the run sheet. Yeah.
I mean, it's like right when you think you know something. And we actually saw Texas play complimentary football in the third quarter of this game, Taylor.
Yeah.
There was a 3-and-out with a really good pass breakup on 3rd and 8 by Jahdae Barron. Marcus Washington blocks a punt. That's Texas's 4th block punt this season. And Texas punches it in for a touchdown. And you're like, oh my gosh. Now we've seen a sign of the apocalypse. Texas played some complimentary football. They're going to find a way out of this hole. And then they don't.
Hmm.
I
Yeah. I
mean,
mean,
Lance Leipold goes for 2 after Marcus Washington gets called for a unsportsmanlike conduct penalty for spinning the football in the end zone when he scores on UT's first, possession of overtime. That allows Kansas to play from the 12-yard line instead of the 25. 3 running plays later and a 2-point conversion pass. And, oh, by the way, Brendan Schooler, God bless him, leading tackler again, second week in a row, drops an interception that would have ended the game in overtime.
yeah, I mean, it was sadly, very reminiscent, I think, of the 2008 Blake Gideon uh, dropped interception. And, it kind of comes full circle, too, because Blake Gideon is the safeties coach this year. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's both sides of the ball were really bad at certain parts of the game, but there was an instance where you did see both sides, I guess all 3 phases of the game, technically, special teams as well, really gel together. And, Steve Sarkisian after the game said that, there's definitely fight in this team and you've seen the fight. The problem is you haven't seen it for a full 60 minutes. Well, you need to see it more than just a quarter, Chip. I mean, we're talking about, the third quarter. And I'm not trying to erase that because there's a lot of different things I feel like that did play into the success or failures on all, both sides of the ball mainly. I wouldn't say all three phases because special teams wasn't too bad or anything like that. But like, I mean, the fact that 21 points of Kansas came off of turnovers, that's bad. I mean, that's terrible for the offense to set up, Kansas in Texas territory essentially and, set the defense up there. But then the defense still gives up what, 57 points to Kansas. I mean, it's mind numbing. I mean, it really is. Like I was driving home from the game, Chip, and I'm sitting there thinking, we're gonna have to do our podcast after the game. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, what am I gonna even say? And I really just don't know because I feel like this team, it seems like they've quit a little bit. Um, and you expect a lot of ups and downs, I think, in a transition year. I know Steve Sarkisian won't call it a rebuilding year or anything like that, but I mean, every time a coach comes in, a new head coach and staff comes in, it's a rebuild. I think, coaches won't say it, but it's the truth. But I mean, the fact that these players don't seem to really feel the sense of urgency about where things stand for them. I'm not trying to be rude, but Chip, part of me is kind of thinking like, if Steve Sarkisian's going to have any success, he's got to get those type of mentality players out of the locker room. And I think it needs to happen sooner rather than later if he wants to stay the head coach of Texas.
Yeah, and think about this week. I mean, we had drama before with Monkeygate and the initial blow up with Joshua Moore and Steve Sarkisian. This week, we get the leaked the player leaked video of Bo Davis irate on the team bus or a team bus after the Iowa State loss. Joshua Moore leaves the team, enters the transfer portal. There's a flu outbreak on the team that hit the defensive line first and then hit Luke Brockermeyer. Keandre Coburn and Luke Brockermeyer did not start in this game because they missed so much practice time this week with the flu.
Yeah.
And
And they
so
both had forgettable performances, I'd
right,
say.
and they're out there trying.
Mhm.
So you have that. You have a COVID-19 restriction contract or contact tracing on Keelan Robinson, so he can't help. Bijan Robinson goes down with a left elbow injury late in the third quarter. Everybody's, waiting to see if it was dislocated or not. You had, Jonathan Brooks, who was having a nice game, go down with a shoulder injury,
Mhm.
and and it just you can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's like one thing after another. Now, to Steve Sarkisian's credit, he didn't, make any excuses. He didn't talk about the flu. He didn't talk about COVID. He didn't talk about Bo Davis. He said we didn't play well enough in the first half to win this game. And now, Taylor, the question: you lose 5 straight games where either you thought you were going to win against really talented opponents, where you have double-digit leads, or you somehow find yourself in an overtime game with a 1-win team, and get a
And a team
chance to win
that's
it and
never
don't.
beaten Texas on the road in Austin, mind you.
Yeah,
This the first win ever. Yeah.
this was Kansas's first Big 12 road win since 2008. That's 13 years, and Texas has made the wrong kind of history with Kansas. I won't even go into it, but tonight they made Jalen Daniels, a backup quarterback who did have a few starts last year, look like Russell Wilson. I mean,
Mhm.
this guy was zipping it all over. Devin Neal running wild. This defense is so bad, Taylor, and it's just, you know, I would love to say, oh, they had the flu, but they've been, they were so good in the first half against Iowa State, probably their best football of the year. And then, the offense does nothing to help, and they give way. Tonight, they gave way from the beginning. I mean, Kansas
Mhm.
scored boom, boom, 13 play, 10 play touchdown drives. They're up 14 nothing. And you're like, oh my good heavens, this Texas defense is atrocious tonight. And it didn't get much better. Gave up 5 yards a carry. And so the point is, Taylor, everyone's looking big picture now and saying, is Steve Sarkisian the right guy? Is this coaching staff the right staff?
Yeah.
Steve Sarkisian was asked, do you think your players have tuned you out? And he said, I think our messaging has been good, but I can't answer that question. You have to ask them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are just not the kind of questions that you want your first-year head coach who had your team in position to beat all these ranked opponents, now with a 5-game losing streak, ensuring that you're not going to have a winning regular season. It's just, and now you got to go on the road to play West Virginia.
Yeah.
And come home and play a K-State team that has won 4 in a row and is now 7-3.
Yeah, and that just handled West Virginia for the most part of the game on Saturday.
Yep.
Kansas State did
Deuce
that,
Vaughn.
Yeah, Deuce, geez, and Skylar Thompson. I mean, some of the throws he was making in that game, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, basically looking ahead at what Texas was about to face. I was just sitting there like, this is not good, and this was before the Kansas game, mind you. But yeah, Chip, I mean, there's issues all across the board. There really is, and the problem, I think, the biggest problem, in my opinion, for Texas is they've shown the ability to handle people. They really have. I mean, you go back to the OU game, they were destroying OU. I mean, just absolutely destroying OU in that first half. And then, second half happens, obviously. And then, follow it up with Oklahoma State. I mean, they were handing it to Oklahoma State and then lose the game. Baylor, I mean, it's the same song, same story, different week, basically, right now with Texas. And, unfortunately, when you look at especially the defense, I mean, at some point it can't just be the coordinators, right? I mean, at some point, Texas is now on how many defensive coordinators has they had?
Oh,
I mean, since Manny
turns time.
Diaz, that was in 2013,
Ugh.
and then who was the guy that came in after him at the midseason?
Greg Robinson.
Greg Robinson, yeah. And then,
What's Greg
Vance
Robinson doing
Bedford.
right now?
Exactly. And then Vance Bedford. What's Vance Bedford doing either? I mean, honestly, Texas is a place where defensive coordinators' careers, I feel like, go to die. And, at some point, you have to, obviously, you want to blame the coaches or the guys get paid, but at some point, you have to blame the players for not having any want to or are going to be okay with, after that embarrassing loss to Iowa State, to come back at home for the first time in a month in front of your own home crowds, one of the only night games that you'll have at home the second, I guess, one of 2 night games that you'll have at home this season, and then you lay that egg. I mean, there's a serious mental and, type, like the whole psyche thing that Steve Sarkisian had been talking about. That's legit. I mean, that is the biggest problem, I think, that what we're seeing with Texas right now, because they've shown the ability to stay in these games, and they just, tumble and stumble all over themselves. And it's like, that's a mental problem. That's a head issue. There's a lot of head cases on this team, and it's showing up on the win-loss record, I think, right now.
And that's the irony about tonight, in that they start off terribly.
Mm-hmm.
Their defense gives up 2 big long drives, touchdown drives to start. Casey Thompson gets hit because Christian Jones can't block his man. Strip sack, that leads to a touchdown. Hudson Card comes in the 3rd series and leads a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
And then he gets strip sacked because Andre Carrick, who's now in at left tackle, can't block the same defensive end, Kyron Johnson, who's also the guy who landed on top of Jonathan Brooks. And when Brooks injured his shoulder, that guy was a wrecking machine. But then Hudson Card comes back out and throws the pick 6. And you're thinking, well, it can't get any worse, right? But then Jonathan Brooks inexplicably tries to field the ball at the 2.
That's right. That was a mistake by special teams. I didn't even count that. You're right. That was a terrible mistake. Yeah.
Well, and they end up kind of getting out of that hole. Casey Thompson's leading them. Then Xavier Worthy limps off with what looked like a hamstring or something. Now he obviously came back in the game. And then Tope Amade gets the, crazy, it rips the helmet off of a Kansas player on the last play of the half. You're like, oh my God, this team is totally disintegrating. And then they come
Yeah.
out and they play with fire. The offense scores. The defense gets three and outs in a row as Texas is clawing its way back in. And Texas was in position to finally win a game late, even though it was Kansas, even though it was, some of the ugliest football you've ever seen. Texas was in position to win the game. And mentally, you're just like, oh my gosh, what this game is going to be really cathartic to Texas, because this is the one thing they haven't been able to do. They haven't been able to close. And then they don't, Taylor. And it's like, you cannot make this stuff up. And look, bad teams find ways to lose.
Mhm.
This is a bad team. And they were confident, and every loss has erased that confidence and replaced it with doubt. Steve Sarkisian's tried to tell us 100 different ways about hope and belief and confidence. You keep losing games like this in the age of social media, it's perception becomes reality. And now here we are. And there were, a dozen or so recruits, Taylor, some of their top offensive line prospects who were in attendance for this game. And, Steve Sarkisian was asked, what do you think your recruits make of this? Like, 5-game losing streak, you lose to Kansas, who hasn't won a Big 12 game on the road since 2008. And he just kind of, mumbled through and said, we have great relationships with our recruits. And, I think they can see some forward movement or something. And, they come for the universe. I don't know what he said, Taylor, but
Yeah,
we're going to
like
find out.
something about like they can see the
Incremental,
positives. Yeah,
right? Yeah,
for
positives.
the
Yeah.
future or something. It was something along those lines. And I mean, you better hope that's the case. And right now, I will say, Chip, Texas still is sitting with the number one, recruiting class in 2022 in the Big 12. I believe they're number 7 nationally according to 24/7 Sports Composite. They definitely had some key offensive linemen recruits on campus in Devin Campbell, Cam Dewberry. I am going to butcher his name, Nito something. I know that because of our guys on the State of Recruiting podcast. I heard them actually pronounce the name and I still can't remember it. But, there's definitely some, there was a lot of, their key targets on campus. The one thing I would say, and who knows if this will play out, but if you're an offensive lineman and you've watched this Texas team this year and you know what Kyle Flood's, track record in developing NFL offensive linemen, as long as there's not concerns that the staff is going to be totally, blown up and gone next year or year 3 or something like that, there's no reason if you're a 5-star recruit to not think, hey, if I want to play early, I'm not going to look at Texas. No, you're going to be like, hey, if I want to play as a freshman, the best place I may have the opportunity to play is probably Texas, because that's how bad Texas offensive line is. And I don't blame Kyle Flood. I really don't. I mean, when he took this job, I was just like, oh gosh, like I mean, it was bad. It was pretty like up and down last year, and Sam Cosney kind of held it together. But without him, oh my gosh, I mean, this is one of the worst offensive lines I think I've seen. So, I mean, if these guys want early playing time and to compete early, in their college careers, a game like this may have helped. But you better hope that that message of, the relationships that you have and trying to, sell the future does actually land with these guys, especially when they're on campus. And you better hope they're not looking at social media right now, because it's a mess. I mean, it's an absolute mess. Even on our message board, we have other, like Iowa State fans that are posting topics, just trolling Texas fans, and even like our members at Horns 24/7. It was kind of like, that's kind of funny because what can we say? And
Yeah.
that's kind of par for the course right now where Texas is. So you have to almost, I mean, you're almost I don't want to say the laughing stock, but a little bit at some point you become that. And it's crazy to say that because Texas has been in pretty much every single one of these losses except for the Arkansas game and I think the Iowa State game. But I mean, Texas could very easily be oh gosh, how many games have they even played? 10 now? I can't even think straight. But Texas could easily be 8-2, but they're sitting here at 4-6.
Yeah. Yeah. It's confounding. And um, Steve Sarkisian has to be strong in the face of all kinds of adversity and doubt. Now it's affecting him
Hmm.
because he's he's overseeing this operation and it's not improving. Um,
Yeah.
5 straight losses. Now Kansas. Kansas has put some, you know, they ended Charlie Strong's career. And this is going to be a turning point for Steve Sarkisian one way or another, Taylor. It's either going to get better from this point forward because this is the bottom.
Yeah.
Um, you could lose at West Virginia and lose at home to K-State, and it's not as bad as losing at home to Kansas.
Hmm.
So this is the bottom, and it's either going to go up or it's going to level or flatten. I mean, it's going to happen one of two ways, and now the narrative's going to be we don't have our players, we got to get our players, even though these just as you said in 3 of these 5 losses against the best of the Big 12,
Hmm.
Oklahoma, Baylor, and Oklahoma State. Texas was in position to win those games and couldn't close the door. And then tonight played terrible early and had, you know, erased 2 21-point deficits to send the game into overtime. Had a chance in overtime to close the deal and couldn't. So,
I mean,
well,
it's like mind-numbing, Chip, right? Like, that's probably the only, because it's almost like I feel like if I were a Texas fan, and this is where I feel for our members because I know that they're losing it right now, and I'm almost afraid that we're off the message board for 22 minutes of recording this because of it,
is there
and I
smoke coming
understand
off
it.
the message board?
I mean, there may be, I don't know, but, like, I understand it, but it's like, I feel like if I were a Texas fan, I would rather them just get annihilated, not this, like, roller coaster up and down, like, "Oh my gosh," at halftime, or we're trailing by 21 to Kansas, this game's over, like, half the stadium left, when that happened. Then they come back to force overtime, then they lose on a two-point conversion that was, I think it looked like it was tipped by, and from our angle, I haven't rewatched it, so I could be wrong on that, but it looked like Keandre Coburn tipped the ball straight into the Kansas receiver's hands for the two-point conversion. I mean, it's just like, I don't know. I'd almost feel like I'd rather see this team totally crumble in every single game and not leave any glimmer of hope that they could win. Because right now, I feel like anytime Texas gets a glimmer of hope, you're almost like, oh, this is going to turn the wrong way. And that's a mental issue. It's a something that's gonna take time to fix, I think. And Steve Sarkisian at this point better hope he has the time to fix it because if you lose to Kansas, a team that is as historically bad in the last decade or more, as you mentioned earlier, Charlie Strong couldn't survive it. And I don't think Steve Sarkisian is going to be gone this year or anything like that. But still, that's going to be a permanent stain on his record, in my opinion, at
Yeah,
Texas.
and the last thing this program needs right now is more change. But
Yes.
will there be change at
Yeah.
the end of this season in terms of how much player attrition? Are there going to be changes on the coaching staff? Where these players have had a different coordinator or position coach every year for the last 3 years. I mean, it's you can't get better
Mm-mm.
if you're constantly changing everything. So the UT brass will, you know, obviously look to protect Sarkeesian from the doubters and give him a chance to get his players in. We've seen his offense be successful. I'll be real interested to see if he's ready to say Casey Thompson is his guy after throwing for 6 touchdowns and running for another. Um, as we said, that ties Colt McCoy's single game touchdown record. He had 6 in 2006 against Baylor. But Taylor, there's a lot more coming. And Texas basketball lost on the road to Gonzaga tonight by 12 points. But hey, go on the road,
Number
play the
number
number one
1.
team,
Yeah.
and Drew
Not one
Timme.
win, Kansas. Yeah.
We learned that Texas doesn't have the size inside. We wrote about that this week. Drew Timme with 37 points for Gonzaga down low, as Texas just had no answer for the 6'10" National Player of the Year candidate. So, tough night for the Longhorns. We'll see. This is going to be a turning point one way or the other, and all we can do is watch and report back to you all on the next episode of the Flagship podcast. So, for Taylor Estes, I am Chip Brown. We'll see you over at horns247.com. Try to take a break if you're feeling a little too frustrated, and we'll catch up with you next time. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, everybody, stay safe and keep the faith.